I was always proud of my truck. The chrome gleamed, the engine growled like a beast, and with every mile I felt free. The road was my home, and loneliness was a familiar passenger. Back then, I thought I was in control of my own fate, but it only took one call, one haul, double the pay. They said it was auto parts. Now I hear the engines hum only in my dreams. And there, behind bars, every night begins with the same question: where does work end and crime begin? If this story resonated with your soul, click subscribe and let me know in the comments which city or country you're listening from. I'm truly curious to know where you're tuning in from. My name is Martha Collins. I was 38 when the wind changed. Not outside, not the breeze you feel through the cracked window of a long-haul rig at dawn, but the wind inside, the one that shifts when something deep within begins to give way. I'd been a truck driver for over a decade, one of the few women in a world carved out by diesel fumes and heavy boots. My roots stretched across the Midwest and down through the southern states, through flatlands and cities that smelled like asphalt and bad decisions. I wasn't born into freedom. My father drove freight out of Sioux City, and my mother washed linens in a motel that stank of mildew and lost hours. There was never a moment when I believed I was meant for more. The dream was simple: get out, stay moving, stay fed. I didn't want a house with a fence or a man with expectations. I wanted the hum of the engine beneath me and the road spilling out in front of my eyes. Always forward, always away. At 22, I got my CDL and left home in a rig older than I was. It rattled on tight turns and leaked oil like a busted vein, but it moved. That was all I needed. That first year, I learned how to sleep upright, how to spot cheap coffee before it touched my lips, how to fix a fan belt with a shoelace, and how to read a man's intentions by the way he looked at my name on the driver's manifest. I never asked for respect. I took it mile by mile, load by load. Being a woman in this job meant becoming invisible in all the right ways. I kept my hair short, my shirts loose, my mouth shut unless there was a reason to open it. I learned the radio lingo, the shortcuts, the way to stack my logbooks to make the hours look clean even when they weren't. I didn't flirt, didn't drink with the guys, didn't laugh too loud at their jokes. I became someone they'd stop underestimating, not out of admiration, but out of exhaustion. I was still there when they weren't. My truck was a 2005 Freightliner, sun-bleached and bruised by time. I called her Maggie. She wasn't fast, but she was steady. Together we crossed snowy mountain passes and mosquito-choked back roads, delivering everything from plumbing supplies to frozen beef. I slept in her cab more than I ever slept in a bed. That little compartment with the torn curtains and the smell of cold metal was home, not because it was comfortable, but because it was mine. I wasn't married. I tried once, briefly, in my late 20s, to a mechanic named Joe who thought my job was a phase and my silence a challenge. When he raised his voice the first time, I left. I didn't explain. I didn't fight. I just packed my things, walked out the door, and drove off without looking back. It wasn't courage. It was survival. There are people in this world who need roots. I wasn't one of them. I was born for the in-between, the liminal space of highways, between towns, between choices. Sometimes I missed things I never had. A child's laughter, a kitchen light left on, a body beside mine that didn't vanish with the sunrise. But those were dreams borrowed from someone else's life. Mine was the rhythm of tires on pavement, the shake of a rearview mirror on a bumpy interstate, the smell of fuel and truck stop soap. I kept a photo in my glove box, not of family, but of myself years ago, standing beside Maggie, holding a cup of gas station coffee like it was a trophy. I looked tired in that photo, wind-blown, hardened by the road, but I also looked proud. That pride had carried me through breakdowns, loneliness, blizzards in Nebraska, and 2 assaults in rest area bathrooms. I never reported them. There was no time, no energy, and no belief that anyone would care. I kept going, always going. In the early days, the road felt like a promise. Later, it became a routine. By the time I was 38, it was a habit I couldn't shake, like smoking or biting your nails or lying to yourself about how fine you really are. I didn't make much money, but it was honest work. My name was clean, my logbooks mostly legal, and my truck, my battered, beloved Maggie, was still running. That was enough. At least it had been. But something had begun to shift. The freight wasn't as steady as it used to be. Fuel prices were rising. Smaller companies were eating each other alive. I'd begun skipping meals to pay for tolls. One night, I found myself parked outside a gas station in Arkansas, staring at the ceiling of my cab, wondering if this was how it all ended. Not with a crash, not with a bang, but with the slow, aching grind of poverty catching up. I had bills stacked on my dash, some unopened. My mother was sick back home, early dementia, the kind that makes her forget where the sink is, but remember the smell of her father's overalls. My brother was calling me more often, asking when I'd come back, as if coming back ever fixed anything. I had no answers, only roots, only miles. Then, one morning, while refueling near Texarkana, a man approached me. He wore a vest from a logistics company I didn't recognize. Said he was looking for someone to take a last-minute load westbound. No paperwork, double rate. Nothing shady, he promised, just a misfiled shipment. Said it was car parts, boxed and ready, no questions asked. I stared at him for a long time. He had a salesman's smile and a driver's hands, cracked, sunburned, calloused from real work. I asked him where the pickup was, how many pallets, what kind of cargo. He said it was easy money. He said I looked like someone who could handle herself. I didn't say yes, not right away. But later, as I pulled away from the station, his number was burning in my pocket, and something inside me, maybe fear, maybe fatigue, whispered that it might be time to bend the rules. Just once, just enough. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself I'd done worse. But deep down, in the marrow of my bones, something had shifted. I didn't know it yet, but I'd already taken the first wrong turn. And the road, that old friend, that brutal, beautiful companion, would never look the same again. The yard was quiet when I pulled in. A dry wind cut through the chain-link fence, rattling loose plastic like distant applause. The man who'd called me, Tony, he said his name was, stood near a stack of shrink-wrapped pallets under a floodlight that flickered at intervals. His vest bore the logo of a shipping company I'd never heard of, one of those off-brand names that sounded just official enough to pass. There were no clipboards, no scanners, no scales, just 3 men in work gloves moving boxes onto a pallet jack, loading them fast, like time was chasing them. I parked with the back of my trailer flush against the dock. No one asked for ID. No one made small talk. I didn't either. I told myself to focus. It was just a run. I'd done thousands. Tony walked up to my window, handed me a folded piece of paper with half the fields blank. Delivery point was somewhere in New Mexico, industrial zone on the outskirts of Albuquerque. The pay was high, wired in advance to a temporary account under my name. When I asked again about the cargo, he said the same line: auto parts, OEM, nothing fragile, nothing illegal. Still, something about the way he avoided my eyes made the back of my neck itch. But I was already there, already hooked. I could feel it, the slow gravity of a choice that's too far gone to reverse. They sealed the trailer themselves, no inspection, no signature, just a thick industrial padlock and a wave goodbye. It took under 10 minutes, and then I was back behind the wheel, engine humming like a secret waiting to break loose. I merged onto the highway just as the sky turned the color of bruised steel. Storm clouds loomed low over the flat horizon, and the first drops of rain streaked across the windshield like sweat on skin. I turned on the wipers and checked the rear view. The trailer followed smooth, obedient, like it always had, but it felt heavier than it should have, not just in weight, but in presence, like whatever was in there had breath and temperature. I tried to shake the thought, reached for the thermos in my cup holder, and drank lukewarm coffee like it was medicine, told myself to focus. 10 hours of open road, nothing I hadn't done before. The first few hours passed without event. Radio low, traffic thin. A coyote darted across the road somewhere outside Amarillo, and I slowed just enough to watch it vanish into the brush. Everything looked normal. Too normal. At a way station just past the Oklahoma border, the lights were on, but no one waved me down. I rolled past, breathing easier than I wanted to admit. Part of me wished they had stopped me. Maybe I wanted someone else to look, to check, to make the decision for me. I pulled into a truck stop around midnight. The lot was half full. Tankers, reefers, sleepers, all parked like sleeping animals under the sodium glow. I backed into a slot at the far end, engine cooling with a low hiss. Rain had stopped but left the air thick and warm. Inside, the diner was lit in yellow, buzzing with conversation. I ordered eggs and hash browns, but barely touched them. My eyes kept drifting to the window, to the shape of my trailer in the distance. I imagined the boxes inside, imagined one breaking open. Back in the cab, I locked the doors and pulled the curtain closed. Still, I couldn't sleep. My mind kept replaying the moment the pallets were loaded, the speed, the silence, the too easy nods. Something wasn't right. I opened the glove box, pulled out the manifest Tony had given me. Half of it was blank. The weight section had been scribbled in pen. There was no company address, no contact number for the recipient. I knew then what I hadn't let myself admit earlier. This was no standard haul. The question was, what now? I considered turning around, but who would I return the cargo to? There was no name, no contract, nothing to cancel. I was already paid, already moving, already complicit. And in this world, backing out wasn't as simple as hitting the brakes. I thought of calling my brother, but what would I say? I took a job I'm not sure about, and now I'm scared. I hadn't said anything like that since I was a kid. That kind of fear, raw, unfiltered, had no place in my life anymore. I fell asleep just before dawn. When I woke, the cab was hot, sun pouring through the windshield, sweat clinging to the back of my neck. The truck next to me was gone. The lot had emptied out. It was time to move. Back on the highway, the road stretched ahead like a question I didn't know how to answer. The signs blurred by: Tucumcari, Santa Rosa, Edgewood. As I neared Albuquerque, the buildings grew taller, the air dustier. The delivery point was in a rundown industrial area, full of warehouses with peeling paint and barbed wire fences. I arrived early, parked just outside the gate. No signs, no logos, just a locked chain on the front gate and a small camera above it. I waited. 15 minutes, then 30. Then a black SUV pulled up. The man inside didn't get out. He just looked at me, then nodded, and the gate buzzed open. I drove in, alone. The yard was silent. Desert wind kicked up dust in small spirals. I backed up to the dock, killed the engine, stepped out. Two men appeared from inside the building. No uniforms, no paperwork. They said nothing, just moved toward the trailer with bolt cutters, snapped the padlock in two. I stood frozen, heart pounding in my ears. As they opened the trailer, I turned away. Not because I didn't want to see, but because I couldn't. Some things, once seen, you can't forget. And some cargo, once carried, you can't ever put down. The flashing lights arrived before the sound. Red and blue bled into my mirrors, turning the inside of my cab into a pulse. I eased my foot off the accelerator, heart hammering against the ribs of my chest like it wanted out. I had been on the road since before sunrise, the highway a ribbon of muted gray under a heavy sky. My thoughts scattered across miles. When the sirens cut through the wind, I knew before I even pulled over that this was the moment I had been driving toward all along. I guided the truck onto the shoulder, the tires crunching against gravel. The engine rumbled low, then idled, a steady, accusing breath. My palms were damp on the steering wheel. Through the windshield, I saw the patrol car settle behind me, doors opening, boots hitting asphalt. I stayed still. My seatbelt was a strap across my chest, holding me to this life I had built, and now, maybe, holding me down as it fell apart. The first officer approached on the passenger side, his partner a shadow moving toward my door. Their hands rested near their belts, but not yet on them. They signaled for me to step out. The air was cool and sharp against my face as I opened the door and climbed down, my boots hitting the shoulder with a dull thud. The officer spoke, words I couldn't fully hear over the hum of traffic, but his gestures were clear, hands visible. Step back, turn around. Another patrol car arrived, then another. The sound of radios crackled like static in my veins. I felt exposed, stripped of the armor of anonymity that the highway always gave me. Now I was just a woman on the side of the road, a truck behind me, and a secret inside it. They asked for my papers. I handed them over, my fingers trembling. The officer flipped through them slowly, scanning the blanks, the scribbled weights, the missing numbers. He said nothing, just lifted his eyes to mine, and in them I saw a reflection I did not recognize. Not a driver, not a professional, but a suspect. One of them moved to the back of the trailer. He examined the lock, then spoke into his radio. Another car arrived. A K-9 unit. The dog barked once, sharp and eager. My stomach dropped as if I were falling down a shaft. I told myself it was still a mistake, that whatever they suspected, it wasn't true, that I hadn't done anything wrong. But innocence is a thin blanket in the cold. They cut the lock. The sound of metal snapping was small but final, like a bone breaking. They swung open the doors. The smell that spilled out wasn't oil or rubber or anything mechanical. It was chemical, sharp, wrong. I saw their faces harden, watched them pull back the plastic sheeting from the boxes. White bricks stacked neatly like books in a library. Not car parts, not anything I could explain away. One of the officers turned to me, his expression unreadable, his hand already reaching for his cuffs. Another recited rights in a flat, practiced tone. I couldn't hear the words. The roar of the highway, the thump of my heartbeat, the sudden rush of blood in my ears drowned everything else out. Cold metal closed around my wrists. I flinched at the snap of it. I had spent years gripping a steering wheel, my hands calloused and sure. Now they were bound in front of me, like I was some fragile thing that needed to be held still. They guided me toward the patrol car. I didn't resist. There was nothing to resist. As they led me past the trailer, I looked once, just once, at the open doors. The stacks of sealed packages gleamed under the dull daylight. That was my cargo, my responsibility, my undoing. My truck sat silent, its engine shut off, the smell of diesel fading. For the first time in years, Maggie didn't look like freedom. She looked like evidence. They put me in the back of the cruiser. The door shut with a heavy click. No inside handle. The world shrank to a hard bench, a cage of glass and metal. Outside, the officers moved like figures in a silent film, their mouths opening and closing around words I couldn't catch. My truck loomed in the window, growing smaller as the cruiser pulled away. I tried to swallow, but my throat was dry. My mind spun back over every choice that had led here. The call, the paperwork, the too good pay. It all replayed in fragments, images scattered like spilled freight. Tony's half smile, the way the boxes had been loaded too quickly, the blank spaces on the manifest. Hindsight was a cruel light. Under it, everything looked obvious. The station was small and beige, the kind of place you pass 100 times without seeing. Inside, the air was cold, the floors slick. They took my fingerprints. They took my belt. They took my shoelaces. They led me into a room with a metal table and 2 chairs. The walls were bare except for a camera's red light blinking steadily in the corner. I sat. My hands were cuffed to a ring bolted to the table. The metal was cool under my skin. I stared at the surface, scratched with initials and gouges from countless others who had sat here before me. The air smelled like bleach and exhaustion. An officer slid papers across the table. He asked questions I didn't want to hear. He read me facts like charges, weights, schedules. I tried to speak, but my voice came out cracked, like it belonged to someone else. I said I didn't know. I said it again and again. My words sounded weak, even to me. Hours passed, or minutes. Time became a loop of questions and answers, of waiting, of silence. I thought about my truck sitting somewhere in an impound lot, alone. I thought about the road outside, the one I had loved, stretching on without me. When they finally led me to a holding cell, I felt the weight of my body for the first time. My boots were gone, my jacket too. The cell smelled of sweat and metal, a mix of fear and resignation. The door clanged shut behind me. The bench was cold and hard. I sat with my back against the wall, knees drawn up, staring at the bars. The hallway outside was dim, voices echoing like distant traffic. For a moment, I closed my eyes and tried to imagine the open highway, the sound of tires against pavement, the taste of coffee at dawn. But even in my mind, it felt far away, like a song you once knew, but can't remember the words to. I wasn't on the road anymore. The road had ended here, in this room, with these walls closing in. Everything I had built, everything I had endured to keep moving, had stopped. And for the first time in years, I wasn't going anywhere. The first night in county jail pressed against me like a heavy wet blanket. I lay on a narrow metal bunk with a thin mattress that smelled faintly of disinfectant and old sweat. My hands folded on my chest as though I were bracing for impact. In my ears, the silence roared. No hum of diesel, no vibration of tires rolling over concrete seams, no CB chatter flickering through static, just the echo of doors clanging shut, footsteps on polished floors, and the low murmur of women whose voices had turned into whispers because loudness no longer mattered here. I had spent years falling asleep to the engine's steady growl, to the rhythm of the highway. Without it, my body felt unmoored, adrift in a still ocean. The walls around me were painted a color that was neither white nor gray, something intentionally dull, designed to mute everything. Yet inside my skull, noise bloomed. Memories of the road collided with flashes of the arrest, the boxes, the moment when the lock snapped. All of it churned together, an unrelenting hiss like wind caught under a door. In the morning, they woke us early. A metal door opened with a mechanical cough, and a guard's voice cut through the dorm. We lined up, our shapes hunched, heads down. I was handed a scratchy uniform the color of muted orange and plastic sandals, too large for my feet. The fabric smelled of bleach and defeat. When I pulled it over my body, I felt like I was putting on someone else's skin. My reflection in the steel of the bathroom door startled me. The woman staring back had sunken eyes, hair plastered to her forehead, and a mouth that couldn't decide if it wanted to open or stay shut forever. Breakfast came on a plastic tray, lukewarm oatmeal, a slice of bread, a cup of something the color of coffee, but tasting like nothing at all. I sat at a long table with other women, but no one spoke. They chewed slowly, mechanically. Some stared straight ahead. Some stared down at their hands. Everyone had their own invisible noise. I could feel it radiating from them, the private storms locked behind blank faces. Later, they led me to intake processing, where my fingerprints were rolled in black ink onto paper forms, where my photograph was taken under a flickering bulb. The guard called me by my last name, flat and clipped. No one asked who I was before. My license, my logbooks, my truck, all the markers of the life I had built, meant nothing here. I was a number and a bed assignment. That was it. I learned the rules quickly because there was no other choice. No leaning on walls, no talking back, no sitting on another woman's bunk, no asking questions you weren't ready to have answered. The pod was a square of echoing space filled with steel tables, bolted down stools, and a television mounted high in the corner, always muted, its captions crawling silently across the screen. Time slowed to a crawl, measured by head counts and meal trays. The days bled together. I mopped floors, folded laundry, scrubbed showers that smelled of rust and mold. I kept my eyes down and my movements steady. The noise in my head never stopped. It was the engine now, but distorted, as if it were underwater. At night, I would lie awake, tracing routes I'd driven across an invisible map on the ceiling, remembering the taste of diner coffee, the weight of the steering wheel under my hands, the way headlights of oncoming cars used to flare and disappear like fireflies. Those memories used to be my comfort. Now they were a kind of torture, a reminder of a freedom I had mistaken for permanence. Some women tried to talk to me. A tall one with faded tattoos on her knuckles asked if I had kids. Another, small and wiry, offered me a honey bun from commissary. I nodded, accepted, answered minimally. I had nothing to trade, no stories I wanted to share. The less people knew about me, the safer I felt. In this place, intimacy was a currency I didn't want to spend. Every so often I caught myself scanning for exits. The back door of the laundry room, the angle of the hallway to intake, the position of the guard near the gate. It was instinct, the same survival reflex I'd used on the road to spot trouble before it found me. But here, trouble was everywhere and nowhere, and there was nowhere to go. Letters from my brother arrived sporadically. His handwriting slanted like it was running downhill. He wrote about our mother, about bills, about weather. He didn't ask questions about me. I didn't answer the ones he didn't ask. I wrote back short notes, careful, stripped of anything that might show the panic rising in me. My pen trembled on the paper. When I sealed the envelopes, it felt like sealing a wound that wouldn't close. I lost track of how long I had been there. Days or weeks, it was all the same color. The pale orange of my uniform, the dull silver of the bunk, the sickly blue of the fluorescent lights. The only rhythm left was the noise in my skull, a constant rush like a truck on an endless downhill. Sometimes I pressed my palms against my ears at night, but the sound was still inside. It was the road leaving me. It was my old life dissolving. One evening, while cleaning tables in the day room, I caught a glimpse of myself in the dark window. Outside, the sky was deepening into dusk, and beyond the razor wire the freeway shimmered with moving lights. I could almost smell the diesel, hear the low growl of an engine shifting gears. For a heartbeat, I imagined walking out, climbing into a cab, driving until the horizon blurred. Then a guard's voice snapped me back, and the vision vanished. I learned to stop standing still too long because it made the noise louder. I moved. I cleaned. I read books from the tiny library cart, anything I could find. Dog-eared romances, outdated travel guides, a Bible missing half its pages. Sometimes I traced the maps in the travel guides with my finger, following interstates and highways I had once driven, pretending I was still out there, moving. At night, the dorm smelled of sweat and soap, of exhaustion so thick it felt like a second skin. Women snored softly or cried into their pillows. I stared at the ceiling and let the noise fill me until it became a kind of numbness. In that numbness, a strange clarity began to flicker. Without the engine, without the road, without the illusion of motion, all that was left was me. Just me, bare, unhidden, and loud inside my own head. I realized that the noise wasn't only the loss of the road. It was everything I had been running from, rushing past, drowning out with the hum of a machine and the miles beneath my wheels. Here, with nothing but walls and time, there was no running. The noise was my past, my choices, my loneliness, my pride, my hunger. It was every mile I had driven away from myself, and now it was all I had to listen to. It started small. A moment in the library, fingers brushing the spines of forgotten books, dust collecting under my nails. I pulled down a battered atlas, old, warped at the corners, the pages crinkled from years of heat and humidity. It wasn't even current. Some roads didn't exist anymore. Some towns had changed names or disappeared altogether. But as I opened it, something inside me shifted. My eyes traced the long blue veins of interstate highways, the crooked back roads, the borders I had crossed without thinking. I followed the winding lines with the tip of my finger, and for the first time since my arrest, I felt movement again, not of wheels against pavement, but something quieter, deeper, a stirring, a memory of direction. I checked out the atlas and kept it under my bunk like a sacred object. At night, when the lights dimmed and the dorm settled into restless breathing, I opened it slowly, like it might break under the weight of longing. Each map was a window. I traveled through states I knew by heart and places I'd never seen. Montana's open spaces, the sharp bends of West Virginia, the endless desert stretch outside Tucson. Every inch of ink reminded me of who I had been, but also forced me to ask who I could still become. That question clung to me during the days that followed. I began waking earlier, before the guards called count, before the rest of the dorm stirred. I'd lie there in the half-dark, thinking not of the outside world, but of the interior one I'd ignored for years. The roads I'd paved inside myself, the ones I'd refused to drive. They were there, waiting, worn and cracked, but still navigable. The noise in my head hadn't stopped, but it had changed. It wasn't chaos anymore, not the crashing static of guilt and memory. Now it was a low hum, like an idling engine, like something ready. I began to listen to it, to follow it inward. They posted a sign one afternoon about an educational program opening up again, a GED prep class followed by basic bookkeeping. The old me would have walked past without a second glance. I had dismissed education as something other people needed. Out there, my knowledge had been survival, axle ratios, tire pressure, load distribution, weather patterns. But inside these walls, none of that mattered. My hands itched for purpose. My brain, dulled by repetition and silence, was hungry. So I signed up. The classroom was a converted room off the chapel, bare except for folding chairs, a dry erase board, and a broken clock that always said 6:12. The instructor was a small woman with a tired face and the kind of voice that made you sit up without being told. She treated us like people, not cases. She handed me a pencil and a workbook with torn edges. My hands shook when I opened it. Math came slowly. Reading comprehension was easier. Writing felt like climbing a mountain in worn-out shoes. But I kept at it. Not because I believed in second chances. I didn't, not yet. But because it gave me a destination. Every page turned was a mile behind me. Every completed assignment, a town passed. The numbers became routes. The grammar rules became signposts. For the first time since my arrest, I felt like I was going somewhere. The other women in the class surprised me. We came from different places, but inside those 4 cinder block walls, we were stripped down to the same essential truth. We had been lost. Now we were trying, in small, clumsy ways, to find a way back to ourselves. We shared answers, not stories, encouragement, not pity. I began to look forward to those hours more than anything else. Outside the classroom, I started to carry myself differently, not with pride, not yet, but with intent. I volunteered to clean the chapel. I helped a younger inmate write a letter to her son. I stopped avoiding the mirror. The face that stared back at me was still tired, still weathered, but it was no longer a stranger. In the library one evening, I stumbled on a worn paperback about meditation. I flipped through it, skeptical, but something in me said, try. So I did. I started sitting quietly for 10 minutes after lights out, breathing slow and deep, letting the silence become a space instead of a void. I pictured the road again, not as an escape this time, but as a metaphor. The road inside me, twisting, narrow, uphill, but there, always there. Some nights I cried, not from shame or sorrow, but from the strange ache of becoming. Change isn't a sunrise, it's a slow erosion. You don't see it until you realize you're no longer the shape you used to be. I thought about my truck often, not with yearning, but with understanding. Maggie had been my shield, my fortress on wheels. I had hidden behind her, from relationships, from grief, from fear, But now there was nothing to hide behind. No metal shell. Just me. Skin and memory. And will. My brother's letters started to soften. He told me about Mom's moments of clarity, about how she asked for me one morning and cried when he reminded her where I was. He didn't judge me. He didn't console me. He simply included me like I still belonged. That did something to me. It stitched a piece of the broken fabric back together. One afternoon, after class, I sat in the yard and watched the sky shift. The clouds drifted slow, casting moving shadows over the gravel. I closed my eyes and let the breeze hit my face, warm and dry. I wasn't on the road, but I was in motion. Inside, something had begun to steer again, not out of desperation, but out of clarity. I didn't know what awaited me when the doors finally opened. I didn't even know if I'd be able to build a life again, but I was no longer frozen, no longer just counting days. I had found a rhythm inside the stillness. I had begun to forgive the silence. The road inside me was rough, uneven, full of debris and regret, but it was mine. And step by step, I was learning to walk it. The gate didn't open with ceremony. No music, no applause, no warm light bathing my face, like in the movies. Just a metallic groan, a buzz, and then a breath of outside air that smelled like dust and cut grass. I stood there a moment too long, holding the small plastic bag that contained the last crumbs of my old life. A comb, a release paper, the paperback atlas I'd been allowed to keep, creased and soft at the edges from too many fingers. A bus waited at the end of the road, its engine idling low. I walked toward it, my steps uncertain, as though I was learning how to move through the world again. The sky was enormous. I'd forgotten how much of it there was. Clouds drifted like bruises, the sun already burning into my skin. The noise in my head was still there, but quieter now, not like a motor anymore, more like an echo in an empty house. I boarded the bus and sat near the back. The seats were cracked vinyl, warm from the sun. Around me, other women clutched their bags, stared out windows, tried not to look at each other too long. No one smiled, no one spoke. We were all in between, no longer prisoners, not yet free, just passengers, a transfer. The ride was long and quiet. Towns passed like mirages, faded gas stations, shuttered storefronts, distant silhouettes of kids on bikes. Life had gone on without me. That was the hardest thing to accept, that I hadn't been missed by the world, that the road I had left behind had kept rolling without pause. The halfway house was a square building with peeling paint and a porch that leaned forward like it was tired of holding itself up. Inside, the walls were beige, the furniture mismatched. A woman with tired eyes handed me sheets and a list of rules. Curfews, chores, job applications, no guests, no alcohol, no excuses. My room was small, barely wider than the cot inside it. A desk, a plastic chair, a barred window that overlooked a side street and a blinking traffic light. But it was a door that closed, a space of my own. I sat on the bed and pressed my palms into the mattress. It didn't sink. It didn't shift. It just held me. That first night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. There were no footsteps in the hallway, no buzzers, no guards, just the hum of the refrigerator down the hall, the occasional siren in the distance, and the deep, strange quiet of unsupervised air. I didn't know how to sleep without being watched. The next morning, I put on donated jeans that didn't quite fit and a plain shirt with a small tear near the shoulder. I walked 3 blocks to a staffing agency, handed over my resume. A sad, patchy thing with more holes than substance. The woman at the desk looked at me like she'd seen 100 just like me that week. Maybe she had. They placed me at a warehouse sorting shipments, not driving them, just lifting, labeling, stacking. The irony didn't escape me. I touched boxes all day, sealed them shut, sent them away without ever knowing where they'd go. The same way mine had arrived, the same way mine had ruined me. I came home sore, my arms aching, feet blistered, but I had earned something, not much, but enough to buy a bus pass and a decent cup of coffee from the corner gas station. I drank it slowly on a plastic bench outside, watching traffic roll by. Trucks, semis, long haulers. My fingers twitched at the sight of them, instinctively searching for a phantom steering wheel. I looked at those drivers and wondered if they knew how easy it was to cross a line and never find your way back. On Sundays, I visited my mother at the care home. She no longer recognized my face, but she smiled when I held her hand. Her room smelled like hand lotion and soft music. Sometimes she hummed old gospel songs, her voice thin but steady. I didn't speak much, just sat with her, breathing in the rhythm of a life that had slowed down to small, quiet moments. Each week I mailed in my check-in forms, wrote down job hours, met with my caseworker who nodded and scribbled notes. She asked how I was adjusting. I told her I was fine. I wasn't, but I was trying. The world was loud again. Too many colors, too many choices, too many people moving in every direction like they knew exactly where they were going. I envied them, but I also knew the cost of certainty. It could make you blind. It could put you behind a wheel, heading straight for the end. I kept to myself. I made my bed each morning, swept the kitchen, watched the way light changed through the window. I didn't make friends. I didn't explain myself. When asked, I said I used to drive. I left it at that. No one needed the rest. One night, walking home from work, I passed a truck stop. Not one of the big ones, just a little place with a diner and a row of parked rigs under humming floodlights. I stood across the road for a long time, watching the silhouettes of drivers move between pumps and doorways. One of them leaned against his truck, smoking, his face lit orange in the glow. My feet itched to cross, to walk up, to say something, but I didn't. I turned away and kept walking, the gravel crunching under my steps. That was the hardest part, knowing I could still feel the road under me even when I wasn't on it, the phantom motion of a life I could no longer have. Still, I kept moving, in small ways. I started reading again. I wrote a letter to my brother that was longer than a page. I applied to a night class at the community college, basic accounting. I didn't know why, just that I needed something to rebuild with. There were setbacks. A woman at the halfway house relapsed and disappeared. A guy at work found out I'd been inside and stopped speaking to me. I heard laughter behind closed doors that felt like it had my name in it, but I didn't stop. I had learned in that cell that the worst thing wasn't being locked in. It was being locked out of yourself. I wasn't free yet, not really, but I was walking a road now that felt like mine, not paved, not easy, but real. And for the first time, I wasn't looking for an exit. I was just learning how to stay.